The desert night was colder than Emily Carter ever imagined it could be. All day the sun had burned her skin through her dress and bonnet, but now, under the sweep of a moonless sky, the chill bit through her bones like teeth. Each breath came as a puff of steam that vanished into the dark as though the land itself swallowed every sign of life. Hours ago, she'd had a family. A husband who promised the West would make them rich, a wagon loaded with everything they owned, and a small circle of travelers who had laughed around campfires and dreamed of new beginnings in California. Now those wagons burned miles behind her, orange embers against the black horizon, and the screams that once filled the air had long since gone quiet. The attack had come without warning. Just after sundown, when the prairie light turned copper and long shadows reached across the land, a group of outlaws rode in from the south. They weren't Apache, though she thought they were at first. They wore no uniforms, carried no flag. Their faces were wrapped in rags against the dust, and their rifles cracked like thunder. Emily had run. She didn't remember deciding to. She simply found herself in motion, skirts tearing, boots slipping in the sand. The last thing she saw of her husband was his body collapsing beside the wagon tongue, his hand reaching toward her before he fell still. Since then, she had wandered through the desert, guided only by the thin thread of moonlight and a will to live that surprised her. The night was vast and silent except for the rasp of her breath and the whisper of dry grass against her torn dress. Every sound, every rustle or coyote's cry sent her heart into her throat. Her canteen was gone, her shoes nearly shredded. The soles of her feet ached, and she felt a fever beginning to pulse behind her eyes. Somewhere far off, an owl called. Somewhere closer, water might exist, in a creek or spring, maybe. She followed the sound of her own heartbeat, one step after another, as though walking could somehow undo what had happened. But the desert is not kind to the lost. The stars were cruel and bright, and the horizon refused to change. The land rolled out in every direction, a sea of stone and ghostly mesquite. She stumbled over a gully and fell hard, her hand striking the gravel. For a moment she lay still, her cheek pressed against the earth. The sand was cold, but there was something comforting in its indifference, the way it neither pitied nor judged her. When she lifted her head, she saw movement in the distance, a shadow against a darker shadow. A man, she thought, though it was impossible to be sure. Panic surged through her. The outlaws might have followed. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. A dry sob escaped her lips. "Please," she whispered into the emptiness. "Please, somebody help me." The figure didn't move at first. Then slowly it came closer. She caught the glint of metal, a rifle, and the faint outline of long hair tied back. Her mind, still tangled in fear and exhaustion, thought of every story she had ever heard about Apache warriors. Ruthless, silent, merciless. But as the figure approached, she saw something unexpected. He moved carefully, not like a raider, but like someone wary of being seen. The moonlight caught his eyes, steady, watchful, unreadable. Emily froze. She didn't know whether to run or beg again. Her lips trembled. "Please," she said once more, her voice breaking. The man stopped several paces away, silent as the wind. For a long moment they stared at each other, two strangers bound by the same desert and the same danger. Then without a word, he lowered his rifle and extended a hand toward her. That was how Emily Carter first met the Apache who would change her life. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The desert seemed to hold its breath around them, the whisper of wind through sagebrush, the faint creak of leather, the distant cry of a coyote. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. The man's face was half in shadow, but she could see the sharp lines of his cheekbones, the bronze hue of his skin, the faint white scar that crossed from temple to jaw. She didn't take his hand. Not yet. Her upbringing, years of Sunday sermons and frontier warnings, screamed at her to be afraid. She'd heard every story settlers told around campfires. Apaches who raided without mercy, who burned wagons and took captives, who vanished into the canyons like spirits. But the man before her didn't move like a hunter. His eyes, dark and steady, studied her not with cruelty but with caution. He spoke first. His voice was low, rough from disuse. "You are alone." Emily blinked, startled by his English. It was accented, clipped, but clear. She tried to answer and found her throat too dry for words. She nodded instead, her mouth opening soundlessly. He crouched near her, setting his rifle on the ground within easy reach. In the faint light, she saw that his hands were scarred. Not the hands of a raider, but of someone who worked, hunted, survived. "You will die out here," he said simply. It wasn't a threat, just a fact. She swallowed hard. My wagon train was attacked." The words came out cracked and hoarse. "Outlaws. They killed everyone. I ran. I didn't know where to go." He looked past her toward the horizon as though searching for movement. "Bad men," he murmured. "White men." "I saw the smoke." Emily hesitated. You saw it?" He nodded once, eyes narrowing. "They ride south now. They take what they want and leave bones for the buzzards." The bluntness of his words struck her like a slap. Her hands shook and she pressed them together to hide it. "Please," she whispered. "I need to find water, a town, anything." He stood, tall and lean, the fringes of his buckskin jacket stirring in the cold wind. "There is a creek. 2 miles, hope surged in her chest. Then you can take me there?" His gaze flicked toward the dark ridgeline, calculating. "Too far to go in open land. They may still hunt. We wait for dawn." "Wait?" Her voice trembled. I can't stay here." "You can," he said, calm but firm. "You have no choice. Night hides us. Day will kill you." It was the tone of someone who had survived long enough to stop arguing with the world. He motioned for her to follow and led her toward a cluster of rocks that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. They crouched in the shallow shelter, half hidden from view. As the wind rose, he built a tiny fire, no larger than a candle flame, shielding it with stones so its light wouldn't carry. From a small pouch, he offered her a strip of dried meat and a handful of cornmeal. Emily hesitated. She was too proud, too frightened to accept, but her hunger betrayed her. She took it with shaking hands and whispered, "Thank you." He gave a single nod and sat back, eyes scanning the horizon. The firelight carved deep shadows across his face. After a long silence, she said, "What should I call you?" He didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "Taza." "Taza," she repeated, testing the sound. "I'm Emily." He inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, not greeting. Then he looked at her again, his expression unreadable. "You are safe tonight," he said, "but only if you listen." Emily didn't yet understand what he meant, but something in his tone, neither threat nor comfort, told her that her life now depended on the strange Apache who had found her. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under the stars, silent and vast. Somewhere in that silence, the outlaws still rode, and in their small hollow of stone and flame, 2 worlds waited to see whether they could trust each other long enough to survive until morning. The fire between them had burned down to a thin glow, a single thread of warmth against the desert's cold breath. Emily sat with her knees drawn up, clutching her shawl tight. Every sound outside their shelter, the rustle of sand, the cry of a night bird, made her flinch. Taza hadn't moved for nearly an hour. He sat cross-legged, silent and still, his rifle resting across his knees. His eyes were fixed on the horizon as though he could see through the darkness itself. Emily couldn't stand the quiet anymore. "You said there's a creek," she whispered. "How far is it, really?" He didn't turn. "Too far for you to walk tonight." "I can try," she said. "I can keep up." "No." His voice was steady, not unkind but immovable. "You make sound. You fall, you die. The night is better friend than you think." Emily let out a shaky breath, trying not to cry. "Then what do I do? Just sit here until sunrise?" He looked at her finally. "You stay quiet. You listen. You do what I say." There was something in his tone, not arrogance but authority. It reminded her of her father, the way he spoke when a storm rolled across the plains and everyone had to move fast or lose the crop. "I'm not used to taking orders," she said softly. His expression didn't change. "Then you learn." She stared at him, wanting to argue, but exhaustion made her limbs heavy. She looked down at her dirt-streaked hands and murmured, I don't understand why you're helping me." He was silent for a moment, eyes back on the darkness. "You were left to die," he said finally. "Even an enemy deserves better than that." His words stung more than she expected. "Enemy?" she repeated. He gave a faint shrug. "You are white. I am Apache. Your people take our land, our rivers. You build towns where our graves lie. That makes us enemies." Emily wanted to deny it, to say she wasn't like those settlers, that she hadn't taken anything from anyone. But she saw something in his gaze that stopped her. A deep, weary sadness that came from years of loss. I didn't come here to take anything, she said quietly. We just wanted a place to live. He nodded once. That is what all your people say. The words cut deep, not in cruelty but in truth. Emily looked away, blinking back tears she didn't want him to see. The silence stretched on until he spoke again. I will take you to water when the sun rises, he said. Then you find your way to Fort Lowell. They will help you. She looked up quickly. And what about you? He didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Taza, she pressed. At last he said, if they see me near the fort, they will shoot. No questions. No talk. She swallowed hard. The unfairness of it, of everything, begun twisted inside her. Then I'll tell them you saved me, she said. A faint smile ghosted across his face, gone before she could be sure it was real. Words do not stop bullets. She stared at him, feeling helpless. There must be something I can do, she said. Some way to repay you. He turned then, meeting her gaze fully for the first time. His eyes were dark but alive, holding something ancient. Sorrow, pride, and the faintest flicker of curiosity. There is a price, he said quietly. Emily's pulse quickened. A price? For my help, he continued. Not gold, not food. You have none. But if I take you to safety, you must listen to me tonight. Every word. You must hear what I say and remember. That is my price, she hesitated, confused. Listen to what? To truth, he said simply. The kind your people do not tell. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire hissed and faded to ash, leaving them in near darkness. Finally, Emily nodded. All right, she whispered. I'll listen. Taza's eyes glimmered in the faint starlight. Then we have a deal, he said. And as the desert wind howled softly beyond their rocky shelter, Emily Carter realized she had just made a promise that might change the way she saw the world forever. The first light of dawn came slow, like a bruise spreading across the desert sky. Purple turned to rose, then to pale gold that glinted on the faraway ridges. Emily hadn't slept at all. She'd sat awake through the long hours of cold and silence, her mind tangled in fear, grief, and the strange calm that Taza carried with him. He rose before the sun broke fully, his movements quiet and deliberate. Without a word, he kicked sand over the ashes of their fire and shouldered his rifle. Emily followed his gaze toward the east, toward survival. We move now, he said. She struggled to her feet, every muscle aching from the night before. Where? Creek first, he replied. Then I take you close to the fort road. But we must move in the shadow. The land has eyes. The outlaws? She asked. His expression was grim. Them, yes. And soldiers. Both hunt for what they fear. That didn't make sense to her, not yet. But she didn't argue. The desert had no patience for talk. They began walking, keeping low among the rocks. The sun climbed higher, but the air stayed cool in the shadow of the mesas. Emily stumbled often, her boots scraping stone, her breath ragged. Taza never slowed much, but he waited when she fell behind. He moved like a man who belonged to the land, each step sure, each pause chosen. After an hour, they reached a narrow ravine where dry brush clung to the edges. Taza raised a hand, signaling her to stop. Emily froze, her heart pounding. He crouched low, eyes narrowing. What is it? She whispered. He didn't answer. He pointed. At first she saw nothing. Then a glint of metal among the rocks. A spent cartridge. Nearby, the earth bore the faint impression of hooves and boots. They were here, he murmured. Not long ago. The outlaws. He nodded once. Maybe an hour ahead. Emily's stomach tightened. Then we can't go that way. He shook his head. If we turn back, the sun will find us. We stay low, follow the ravine, quiet. She obeyed, heart hammering in her chest. Every sound seemed louder than it should be. Her breath, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the faint rattle of her skirt. They moved for miles in silence. At last she heard it, the soft, miraculous sound of running water. The creek was no wider than a wagon trail, its surface glinting under the morning light. Emily dropped to her knees beside it, cupping her hands and drinking greedily. The water was cold and clean. She let it spill down her chin, gasping as the chill woke her fully for the first time in days. Taza stood nearby, watching the horizon. His rifle was in his hands again. She looked up at him. You're not drinking? He shook his head. Later, she frowned. You don't trust me? He gave her a faint, weary smile. I trust water more than people. Before she could respond, he stiffened suddenly. His head tilted, listening. "What is it?" She whispered. "Riders," he said. Coming fast, her heart leapt to her throat. "The outlaws?" "Maybe," he said. "Maybe soldiers. Either one brings death." He motioned sharply, and they scrambled behind a boulder at the creek's edge. Dust rose on the far ridge, faint at first, then growing. Emily could make out 3 riders, their shapes distorted by the shimmer of heat. Taza raised his rifle but didn't aim yet. He was measuring distance, wind, direction, all without panic. Emily crouched low, trembling. "We can't fight them," she whispered. "We have to run." "Run where?" he asked. "The desert will show them your tracks. Better they pass." She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying not to breathe too loudly. The riders drew closer. She saw sun flashing on gun barrels, dust settling over the path like smoke. For a long moment, time stopped. The men rode past, no more than 100 yards away. One turned his head, scanning the ravine, and Emily's heart froze. She prayed he wouldn't see. Then, as quickly as they came, they disappeared over the ridge, leaving only the echo of hooves and the slow settling of dust. Taza didn't move until the sound was gone. Then he lowered his rifle and said, "You see? In this land, enemies wear every color." Emily looked at him, shaken. "Who were they?" He glanced at the fading dust. "Does it matter? One side kills for gold, the other kills for fear." He turned back toward the creek, his silhouette sharp against the morning light. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "This is why we travel by night." And as they began moving again, Emily realized that out here, in this vast, wild place, there was no such thing as safety, only the shifting line between hunter and hunted. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the desert shimmered like molten glass. Every rock seemed to hum with heat. Emily's bonnet had long since been lost, her skin red and raw beneath the relentless glare. Sweat trickled down her back, then dried before it could cool her. Taza walked ahead of her, silent as always, a ghost among the stones. His pace never faltered. Where she stumbled, he stepped sure-footed. When she fell to her knees once, too weak to rise, he turned and said only, "Get up." She wanted to scream at him, to say she couldn't, that he was cruel, that she wasn't made for this land. But his eyes stopped her. There was no anger in them, only certainty, so she forced herself up, staggering forward one aching step at a time. By late afternoon, they reached a cluster of cottonwoods, shading a small pool of clear water. It was a miracle, a hidden pocket of green in an ocean of dust. Taza motioned for her to drink. She fell to her knees again and drank until her stomach cramped. When she looked up, he was watching her. "You are not weak," he said simply. "You think you are, but you are not." The words startled her. "You don't know me. I know this land," he said. "It shows what people are. The desert doesn't lie." She didn't know what to say to that. Instead, she wrung out her shawl in the water and glanced toward him. "Why are you out here, Taza, alone?" He was quiet a long time before answering. "I am a scout," he said finally. "I watch the soldiers. I count their wagons, their rifles. I tell my people when they move, so you're spying on them." He gave a short nod. "You would call it that? I call it surviving." Emily hesitated. "And your people, where are they now?" He looked away, his expression tightening. "Far from here. Driven north. Some killed, some taken." "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. He gave a low, humorless laugh. "Do not be sorry. It changes nothing. The river runs the same." A long silence stretched between them. The sound of wind in the cottonwoods was the only voice left. Emily sat back on her heels, studying him. His face was carved by sun and years, but there was something young in his eyes, a flicker of what might once have been hope. "I don't understand," she said softly. "If you hate my people, why help me?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because hate is heavy, too heavy to carry forever." Something in her chest ached at those words. She looked down, tracing her finger along the dirt. "You speak English well," she said after a while. "Mission school," he said. "They tried to make us forget who we were. They taught us prayers, letters, white men's songs. I left. What did you take with you?" He smiled faintly. "Only what they could not burn." That answer lingered in her mind. As the shadows lengthened, Taza built a small fire under the cottonwoods, careful to keep the smoke thin. He handed her a piece of dried venison. She took it gratefully. For the first time since the attack, she felt a kind of peace. fragile like glass but real. When night fell, stars appeared sharp and endless above them. Emily found herself staring upward, marveling at how close the sky felt, as if she could reach out and touch the Milky Way with her fingertips. Taza spoke softly. "You see those stars? The ones that cross the sky like a trail?" She nodded. "My people call them the path of spirits. When we die, we walk that path to our ancestors. Your people call it the Milky Way. Same sky. Different words," Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe we're not so different after all." He glanced at her, his face unreadable in the starlight. "You think that now? But the world is made of walls, some built with wood, some with skin." She wanted to protest, but his voice was too calm, too certain, so she said nothing. Instead, she wrapped her shawl tighter and stared into the flickering fire. The night was quiet except for the soft hiss of flame and the distant cry of an owl. Two strangers, one born to the desert, one cast into it, sat side by side, separated by centuries of fear and misunderstanding. And yet in that fragile pocket of darkness and light, something unspoken passed between them. Something that neither of them yet understood. The night had settled deep over the desert, black and vast. The fire burned low, a single coal-red eye between them. Emily sat close to it, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her body was still, but her mind churned with everything she had seen, everything she couldn't yet name. Taza sat across from her, motionless, the rifle resting beside him. The shadows made his face a shape of contrasts, half light, half dark, as though even the fire wasn't sure which world he belonged to. He spoke without looking at her. "You kept your word," he said quietly. "You listened." Emily nodded, unsure what he meant exactly. "You said there was a price," she whispered. "I still don't understand." His eyes lifted toward the stars. "You will." For a long moment he said nothing more. Then slowly he began to speak. "When I was a boy," he said, "my village stood near the San Pedro. There were cottonwoods, water, fields where we grew corn. My father traded with the soldiers sometimes, leather, horses. We thought maybe peace was coming. But peace is a word with sharp edges." He paused. The fire popped softly. Emily could see the tightness in his jaw. One morning the soldiers came. Blue coats, bright brass, rifles shining in the sun. They said they wanted to talk. My father went out to meet them. I remember his shadow stretching across the sand. His voice grew quieter. They said we had to move north. Reservation land. They said we would be safer. My father refused. They shot him before he could finish speaking. Emily's breath caught. "They burned our homes," he went on. "Took our women and children. The rest scattered into the hills. I ran until my legs broke. I was 12. The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily felt them settle deep in her chest, heavy and terrible. "I've heard stories," she said softly. "But I didn't know." "No," he interrupted gently. "You didn't want to know. None of your people do. It is easier not to." His tone wasn't cruel. It was tired. The weariness of a man who had carried too much truth for too long. "I thought the outlaws who attacked us were savages," she said, voice trembling. "But they were." "White," he nodded. "Your kind has many faces. Some wear badges, some wear rags, but the land remembers all of them." She stared at him, struggling with the knot of guilt and disbelief forming inside her. "So that's your price?" she asked. "To tell me what they did?" He met her gaze. "No, the price is that you remember it. You tell others. Not with anger, but with truth. When they speak of this land, you speak of who it belonged to before they came. You carry that in your heart." Emily swallowed hard. "Why me?" "Because you asked for help," he said simply. "And because help has weight. You cannot take it and stay the same." The fire cracked again, throwing sparks into the dark. One drifted upward, glowing briefly before fading into the starlight. Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. She didn't want to cry in front of him, but she couldn't stop. "I can't make up for what's been done," she whispered. "No," he said. "You cannot. But you can listen. You can learn. That is more than most." For a long while there was only silence, the vast, patient silence of the desert that had seen too many broken promises. Taza stood then, his figure outlined against the stars. "Dawn will come soon. You will go to your people. I will go to mine." Emily rose unsteadily. "And if I never see you again?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then remember me when the wind moves through the cottonwoods. That will be enough. She wanted to say something more, not to thank him, to tell him she was sorry, to ask what he would do now. But her throat closed around the words. The fire flickered once, then went out. In the darkness, his voice came softly, almost a whisper. The desert takes everything, but it gives truth to those who listen. That was my price. The fire was gone, but the stars burned brighter than any flame. They filled the sky in endless bands of silver, shimmering against the black vastness above them. Emily sat cross-legged, her shawl drawn around her shoulders, listening to the quiet rhythm of Taza's voice as he spoke, not to her, but to the night itself. He told stories in fragments, of rivers that once ran deep through the valleys, of herds that covered the plains, of a time when the land had no fences and no flags. His words came like wind over stone, soft, patient, shaped by loss but still alive. Emily didn't interrupt. She only listened, her heart heavy and wide open. At last he said, "My people teach that stories are alive. When you tell one, you give it breath. When you listen, you give it a home. So tonight you carry them with you." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening in the starlight. "I will remember," she said. "I promise." Taza studied her for a moment. "Promises are easy under the stars," he said quietly. "Harder when the sun comes." "I mean it," she insisted.
"I'll tell them. My children, if I ever have any."
"I'll tell them the truth." He gave a slight nod, accepting that. Then maybe the desert will forgive a little. They sat in silence for a long while. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, a lonely, wavering cry that rose and fell like a prayer. Emily felt the sound settle deep in her bones. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. "You're home by the river?" Taza turned his gaze toward the horizon. "You do not miss what still lives inside you," he said. "The land remembers even when men do not." His words lingered in the air. Emily thought of her own home, the green hills of Missouri, the smell of lilacs after rain, her mother's voice calling her in for supper. All of it seemed so far away, like another lifetime. "I used to think the frontier was freedom," she said, "that we could start over, make something new. But now I wonder if we were only taking what wasn't ours to begin with." Taza looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Freedom built on another's bones is only another kind of prison." Emily lowered her gaze, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Then what am I supposed to do with that? With all this guilt?" He reached into his pouch and took out a small, smooth stone. He held it out to her. "You carry it," he said. "Not to suffer, but to remember. When the guilt feels heavy, you let it teach you, not break you." She took the stone from him carefully. It was warm from his hand, the surface worn smooth by years of touch. "What does it mean?" "It was my mother's," he said. "She told me it came from the riverbed near our home. She said it remembers the sound of water even now." Emily clutched the stone tightly. "I'll keep it safe." Taza looked away. "You keep the story safe. The stone is only a reminder." The stars wheeled slowly above them. The night grew colder. She wanted to ask him more, about his mother, his people, what he would do when she left. But something told her not to. Some silences deserved respect. Instead, she said quietly, "You could come with me, to the fort. I'll tell them you saved my life." He shook his head. "Your soldiers do not listen. Their ears hear only what they want." "Then I'll make them," she said, surprising herself. "They'll have to." He smiled faintly, that ghost of a smile she'd seen once before. "You are brave," he said. "But bravery is not always enough." Emily sighed, staring at the dying embers of the fire. "Maybe not. But it's a start." Taza rose then, tall against the glow of the stars. "The night is almost over. When the sun comes, I will take you to the road." She stood too, holding the stone close to her chest. And then, he looked toward the horizon, where the first faint band of light was rising. "Then our paths end." Emily's throat tightened. "And if I never see you again?" "Then the wind will carry my story," he said softly. "And you will tell it." They stood together in the hush before dawn. Two figures caught between darkness and light, enemies by birth, bound now by truth. And as the first pale edge of morning touched the desert floor, Emily Carter understood at last that the price she had paid was not her night, but her heart, the part of her that would never again look at this land and see it as empty. The dawn came pale and sharp, the kind that makes every sound in the desert seem louder, every shadow crueler. A thin mist hung over the dry creek bed, silver against the rising sun. Emily walked beside Taza as they moved toward the ridge. Her legs ached, her lips were cracked, but her heart felt strangely light. The kind of lightness that comes after a night of truth. She held the small river stone in her hand, feeling its smoothness like a secret heartbeat. Ahead, the land began to change. The ground rose, scattered with scrub oak and the broken skeletons of old trees. Beyond that ridge, Taza had said, lay the wagon road that led to Fort Lowell. Civilization. Safety. The word safety now seemed uncertain. They climbed in silence. When they reached the top, the world opened wide. A rolling expanse of golden plains that stretched to the horizon. And there, cutting across it like a scar, ran the wagon road. Taza crouched low, studying the land below. A faint column of smoke rose in the distance, a campfire maybe, or soldiers. We are close, he said quietly. Emily shaded her eyes. The fort, he nodded. Half a day's walk, maybe less. But we wait until the road is clear. She exhaled, half with relief, half with dread. What will you do when we reach it? I told you, he said. I go my way. She wanted to argue, but the firmness in his voice stopped her. Instead, she said, you could come. I could tell them you saved me. Taza shook his head. Your people do not want to hear that. To them, an Apache near the fort is danger, not salvation. Emily bit her lip. Then it isn't fair. He gave a faint shrug. The world is not fair, Cheesy, she frowned. What does that mean? It means oak leaf, he said. Small but strong. She smiled despite herself. I'll take that. They sat for a while, watching the light creep across the plains. The moment was quiet. Too quiet. Then, faintly, came the sound of horses. Taza froze. His head lifted. He motioned for her to stay low. The hoofbeats grew louder, steady, disciplined. Not the ragged thunder of outlaws. Soldiers. Emily's heart leapt. It's the army, she whispered. We're saved. Taza's expression didn't change. Stay down, he said, but she was already standing, waving her arms. Here, down here, she called. Emily. It was too late. 4 riders appeared over the ridge. U.S. cavalry, their uniforms dusty but unmistakable. The lead rider pulled his horse to a stop, rifle raised. Emily stumbled forward, breathless. Thank God. I'm Emily Carter. Our wagon train. We were attacked. The soldiers looked past her. Their eyes locked on Taza, who stood half in shadow, rifle still in hand. One shouted, Indian! Drop your weapon! Taza didn't move. His gaze stayed on Emily, calm but wounded, as if he already knew how this would end. No, she cried. He's not. He saved me. Hey, but the soldiers weren't listening. One fired a warning shot. The sound cracked across the morning air like thunder. Put the gun down! Another barked. Taza slowly crouched, setting his rifle on the ground. His movements were deliberate, peaceful. His eyes never left hers. Don't shoot, Emily screamed. He's with me. 2 soldiers dismounted, rifles still aimed. They seized Taza roughly, wrenching his arms behind his back. One kicked his rifle aside. Ma'am, step away, the officer said. You don't know what he's done. I do, she cried. He saved my life. The officer's expression hardened. That's what they all say. Until the knives come out. Emily struggled forward, but one soldier held her back. Taza didn't resist. He stood straight, his face unreadable as they bound his wrists with rope. Their eyes met, hers wide with panic, his calm, almost forgiving. Don't fight, he said softly. This is not your battle. Tears burned her cheeks. I can't let them, he gave a small shake of his head. You already kept your promise. That is enough. Then without another word, they dragged him away toward the horses. Emily screamed after them, but her voice broke on the wind. The soldiers didn't look back. The desert swallowed the sound as it always did, and without mercy. When the dust finally settled, she was alone again. The road lay ahead, safe and empty. But Emily didn't move. She stood on the ridge, clutching the river stone in her hand until it cut into her palm. Below her, the sun rose over the plains, bright, merciless, indifferent. For the first time, Emily Carter looked at its beauty and felt nothing but grief. The fort rose from the desert like a wound. Rough-hewn timber walls, sun-bleached flags, and the sour smell of sweat and gun oil. Emily reached it by mid-afternoon, led there by the same soldiers who had taken Taza. They brought her to the command tent first, gave her water, and told her she was lucky to be alive. They praised her courage, her frontier spirit. She nodded, said thank you, and tried to make her words sound whole. But her thoughts stayed outside the walls, on the man they'd called an enemy. When she asked about him, the officer's face hardened. The Apache? He's being held for questioning. Questioning? She repeated.
He saved me.
Ma'am, the officer said carefully, men like that don't save people. They watch. They scout for ambushes. You were probably bait. Emily slammed her fist against the table before she realized she'd done it. He risked his life for me, she cried. He could have left me to die. The officer sighed, clearly tired of her hysteria. Mrs. Carter, I understand you're grateful, but I've seen what these people are capable of. We'll handle it. Handle it. That phrase followed her through the fort like a curse. They gave her a cot in the infirmary and food she could barely swallow. Outside, the world bustled with soldiers drilling, horses stamping, the clang of blacksmiths. The sound of it all, order, power, authority, made her sick. That night she couldn't sleep. She got up and wandered the camp until she found the holding pens near the stables. A guard stood watch, half asleep, his rifle propped against the post. The moonlight spilled across the corral fence, and there in the shadows she saw him, Taza. He sat on the ground, wrists bound, a single lantern casting a weak circle of light around him. His face was bruised, but his posture was unbroken, proud, silent, unafraid. Emily's throat tightened. She waited until the guard turned away, then whispered, Taza. His head lifted. When he saw her, he smiled faintly, that same ghost of warmth she'd seen before. You should not be here, he said quietly. They think you're a spy, she said. They won't listen, he shrugged slightly. They never do. Tears burned her eyes. I'll make them understand. I'll tell them everything. You saved me, I owe you my life. Taza looked at her for a long moment, the silence between them deeper than words. You owe me nothing, he said at last. You kept my story. That was all I asked. But they'll hurt you, she said desperately. He didn't answer, just lifted his gaze toward the stars beyond the wooden slats. If they do, the wind will carry what they cannot kill. Emily gripped the fence, her nails biting into the wood. You can't talk like that. There must be a way. There is none, he said softly. But you have a way. Use it. Tell what you saw. Tell what you learned. His calmness broke something in her. It isn't enough, she said, her voice shaking. It doesn't make it right. He looked at her, eyes gentle in the moonlight. Nothing makes it right. But truth lives longer than men. That is what I have left, the guard stirred. Emily wiped her face quickly. I'll come back, she whispered. He gave a small nod. Do not. They will see. Go live your life, Cheesy. That is the only thanks I need. She hesitated, then pressed the stone he'd given her to her heart. I'll never forget you. Taza's gaze softened. Then my story will not die. She backed away slowly, her eyes never leaving his face until the shadows swallowed him again. By dawn, the camp was restless. Word spread that the prisoner had escaped during the night, slipped his bonds, vanished into the desert like smoke. Some said he had help. Others said no man could have done it alone. Emily said nothing. She stood at the fort gates, the river stone hidden in her palm, and looked out toward the endless horizon. Somewhere beyond those ridges, the wind carried a story, his story, and she knew she would spend the rest of her life making sure it was heard. The fort behind her felt like a cage, the desert beyond, like truth. She took one step toward it before the soldiers called her back, but in her heart, she had already gone. 50 years later, the desert had changed. Rail lines cut across the plains where wild horses once ran. Towns had grown from dust, red brick banks, telegraph wires, and the endless hum of progress. Yet some things still refused to vanish. The wind, the stars, and the silence that lived between them. Emily Carter sat on the porch of her small farmhouse outside Tucson, wrapped in a worn shawl. The years had carved deep lines into her face, but her eyes still held the quiet fire of the frontier. The same eyes that had once watched the sun rise over the ridge with an Apache beside her. Her grandchildren sat at her feet. 3 of them, wide-eyed, restless from supper. The youngest, Clara, clutched the smooth gray stone Emily always kept near. Tell us again, Grandma. Clara said. The story of the desert man? Emily smiled faintly. You've heard it 100 times, child. Tell it again, the girl insisted. The one where he saved you. Emily's gaze drifted toward the horizon. The sky was painted in the same colors she remembered, gold melting into crimson, shadows stretching long. All right, she said softly, but listen carefully. This isn't a story about saving. It's a story about remembering. The children quieted. Even the wind seemed to hush as she began. She told them about the wagon train ambush, the desperate flight through the canyon, and the man who found her when all hope had died. She told of their night in the desert, how fear became understanding and how a story became a bridge between two worlds. Her voice wove through the dusk like smoke, steady and low. She did not embellish or soften it. She spoke as it had been, the cruelty, the mercy, the impossible choices. And when morning came, she said, the soldiers took him. They called him a savage, but he was the only man who ever taught me what it meant to be human. The oldest boy frowned. Did they hurt him? Emily hesitated. The world hurt him long before that day, she said. But he lived on, here. She touched her heart, then reached for the stone in Clara's hand. This was his mother's, she said. He gave it to me so I'd remember his story. I've kept it all my life. Now it's time someone else does. Clara's small fingers closed around the stone. I'll remember, she whispered. Emily smiled through tears. Then he'll never truly be gone. The children stayed silent for a moment, absorbing her words the way only children can, not as history, but as truth. When they finally went inside, Emily remained on the porch, watching the stars prick through the twilight one by one. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote called, the same lonely song she'd heard that night so many years ago. She closed her eyes and listened. In the rustle of the wind, she could almost hear Taza's voice. The wind will carry what they cannot kill. A soft smile touched her lips. It carried you well, she murmured. Inside the house, the lamp flickered and Clara's voice drifted out, whispering the story to her brothers even as they fell asleep. The names might blur, the places might fade, but the heart of it, the truth, would go on. Emily leaned back in her chair, her bones aching but her spirit light. She had spent her youth running from fear, her middle years fighting guilt, and her old age chasing redemption. Now at last she understood. The real price of that night had not been suffering. It had been awakening. When dawn broke the next morning, the desert glowed the color of gold dust. The farmhouse stood quiet. On the porch, only the river stone remained, warm from the first touch of sunlight. And as the wind swept across the plains, it carried with it the sound of an old story, of a woman and a warrior, of guilt and grace, of one night that bound two hearts across 1,000 miles of silence. It carried the story toward the horizon, and then beyond it, to where the land still remembered what people tried to forget.